Hi guys, it's me, ChazzaHDF1, and welcome to the 55th episode of the podcast, where after reviewing the 2019 Formula 1 season last week, we are now this week, just like we did last year, we're going to give our early predictions for next season, the 2020 Formula 1 season, of course, and we're going to go through all the teams and how we think they'll progress or maybe not progress going into next season, look at the drivers as well and how we think they'll do next season, and at the very end of the stream, we will give our top 10 predictions, me and Nib, for the drivers and the constructors. I just have to make clear, though, before I bring Nib in, that these are not our final predictions, because, of course, we haven't seen preseason testing, and our predictions, I'm sure, will evolve and change based on that. But this is kind of based on just how we think teams and drivers are going to do next year, mostly based on how, of course, they've done this season. Hopefully, you guys are doing well. Hopefully, no matter what time it is in the world, you guys today will enjoy the podcast and also give us your thoughts and predictions for 2020, your very early predictions for 2020 as well. But let me now bring in Nib for the podcast. Nib, how you doing, mate? And are you looking forward now to getting into 2020?
Yes, I'm doing pretty well. Thanks for asking, as per usual. But yeah, 4 months ahead of the season. I think in a couple of days it will be exactly 4 months. The season will start, so looking forward to it for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, once we get into January and February, we'll get really into 2020 content. But this is really the first, I guess, video that is dedicated towards the 2020 Formula 1 season. So let's first go into the top teams and how we think they'll get on next season. Again, kind of based on how they ended this season. So let's start off with the world champions Mercedes and the world drivers champion Lewis Hamilton. And as a team and a driver, they are still the team and combination really to beat in 2020, because as a team, they are way too consistent. Yes, they don't always have the best car, but you can absolutely bet on them 90% of the time still being right up there, even if they don't have the best car. Just look at certain races this season and 2018, 2017. So going into 2020, I think definitely they are the favourites for both world championships, Mercedes and Lewis Hamilton. For Mercedes, I think they're looking quite ominous, honestly, for next season, because if you look at the development phase for them during 2019, they were developing the car quite a lot up until about the summer break. And then after that, they didn't really bring that many parts at all. And what that tells me is quite obvious that this team is already been working quite a long time on their 2020 F1 car, and that really does make it look and sound quite ominous going into next season for rivals Red Bull and Ferrari and Verstappen, Vettel, Leclerc. So I would expect Mercedes next season to definitely have a good car, a car that is probably at the same level as it was during the second half of 2020. I don't think they'll dominate the first 8 or 9 races like they did in 2019, but they're going to have probably still overall the best car on the grid. And for Lewis Hamilton, as long as he maintains his level that he has in the last 2 or 3 years, then if the car is, as good as we think it will be, Lewis Hamilton should win the Drivers' World Championship again. It will be hard. There will be, challenges along the way. Red Bull and Ferrari will be quick at certain races. I think Max Verstappen, Leclerc Sebastian Vettel will be probably not massively better, but slightly better next season than they were in 2019. So it's not going to be a comfortable ride for Lewis Hamilton, but definitely, if the car is there, Lewis Hamilton is the man to win the World Championship. And hopefully Valtteri Bottas can put up an even stronger fight next season than he did this season. He came out, of course, of 2019 saying he has a special plan to beat Lewis Hamilton in 2020. And hopefully that plan does come to fruition and it does work, because I do want to see a proper title battle in 2020. And Nib, for this team and driver Lewis Hamilton, you got to say they are the favourites for next season for sure.
I mean, how can you bet against Mercedes and Lewis Hamilton at this stage? I know I did last for this season, which was rather foolish of me. But yeah, for sure, I think that that Hamilton and Mercedes absolute clear favourites. Hamilton doesn't even have to be at his best to win the championship. Mercedes have to produce a half-decent car, and I think they win the title still because Ferrari can't get it together. And I know, even though Red Bull are still, they're still a very well-run team. They have one of the best drivers on the grid. I know they're still just not able to put it all together as of yet. That might change for next season. But I think, Mercedes always start so strong, and by about France or Austria, the title's already pretty much over. So I think if the other teams of Ferrari and Red Bull and others start slow, I think that Mercedes will fly out the gates and, we'll probably wrap up the title by about Austria.
Yeah, that would be very disappointing, wouldn't it, if they wrapped it up by Austria? But as you say, the start to next season, after what we saw this season, is critical, because the reason Mercedes was so dominant in terms of results was because Red Bull aerodynamically had not got it quite right for 2019 until about mid-season, and Ferrari, as we know, started off with a car that was simply not good enough. So the start of next season is definitely critical for the other teams if they are going to beat Mercedes. But as Nib said, as long as they produce a car that is championship worthy with the drivers they have and how consistent a team they are, very hard to bet against them. It is very, very hard to bet against them. But now let's get into the other two top teams and look at whether they can pose a threat to the Silver Arrows. First up, Ferrari. Well, they definitely cannot pose a threat. Ferrari, awful 2019. I think, honestly, going into 2020, because of how incompetent a team they are and the amount of mistakes they make, they need a car that is so quick, half a second, 3/4 of a second, or a second a lap quicker than anyone else. They need that type of pace to bail them out when they eventually, not if, but when they eventually make critical mistakes. And that's what Ferrari are going to do yet again in 2020, because they're continuing basically with the same team that failed in 2019. I don't think Ferrari are going to produce a car that is the best, in Formula One next season. I think they should produce, and I think they will produce, a car definitely at the start of next season that is better than the 2019 Ferrari, the SF90. But again, they need a car that is dominantly quick to bail them out when eventually everything goes wrong. For the drivers, Sebastian Vettel, I think he'll continue to regress. I just don't think Sebastian Vettel is really ever going to be getting back to how he was, say, in 2015 or at the end of his Red Bull days, in 2013. I just don't think we'll ever see that Sebastian Vettel consistently again. So I don't think Sebastian is really going to be up there that much in 2020. The only positive, though, for Ferrari is that Charles Leclerc should be better next season, because obviously second year at Ferrari, more experienced, and I think given that he's now had a year with the team, he should be able to, definitely the start of the season where he was quite slow in 2019, he should be able out of the gates to be very quick and to just continue how he kind of left off in 2019. But yeah, Charles Leclerc, I think, definitely will be improved and will push Verstappen and Hamilton hard when he has the car and the team to do so. But for Ferrari, they have no chance at all of winning the Constructors, and their drivers have no chance at all, in my opinion, of winning the Drivers' World Championship, because they just, as a team, they're going to make so many mistakes that, again, even if they have a car that is good at certain weekends, they'll throw it away. And for the Drivers' Championship, the drivers, I don't think, will drive terribly, but they won't have the car or the team to put them in a position to win the World Championship. So if you're a Ferrari fan, I wouldn't expect anything that dramatically good in 2020. I think this team really should be focusing on 2021 and getting that right. Nib, for Ferrari, is there any hope of a 2020 World Championship? I just don't think there is.
I don't know if they will have a chance, if I'm going to be perfectly honest. I think that it's going to be very hard for them not to produce a better car in the corners, because, well, look at the start of the season. Where was it? We'll go to the Spanish Grand Prix. After pre-season testing, we thought they had a 3/10 advantage at that track, and they're losing 7/10 or 9/10, whatever it was, in the final sector. So I don't think it's going to be that difficult to produce a better car in the corners. They should still. I think that the engine advantage might sort of even out, but who knows? They could still have an advantage in the engine area. But as you were mentioning, Charles Leclerc, his second year in Ferrari, third year in Formula One, I think he will go from strength to strength. We've seen him early in the season making a fair few mistakes, getting out qualified by Sebastian. I think one of the big moments was Baku, where he crashed into the wall in qualifying when he really should have had pole position that day because he was looking absolutely dominant. Another, I think, turning point was Hockenheim when he crashed out of the race, where he could have very easily have got a win or a podium that day. So, and then I think we've seen a different Charles Leclerc from then on. He went on to get 3 poles in a row, win 2 races in the second half of the season. We've seen a much better and improved Charles Leclerc, and I think that he can, oh my word, get a lot better. So yeah, I think that Leclerc will have a much better season for what was already a very good season in 2019. So yeah, but with Sebastian Vettel, I think he had a better second half of the season than what he's probably had since about pre-Singapore 2017. I thought the Vettel was a lot stronger in the second half, say post-Singapore, or from Singapore onwards, I should say. So I don't know. I still hold hope for Sebastian. Of course, I held lots of hope for him at this time last year, where I said he was going to win the world title. I'm not quite holding that much faith, but I'm really hopeful for Sebastian. I hope he does well because he's a 4-time world champion after all, and he's an all-round. He's just a very nice guy. So I hope he does well. But yeah, I don't hold too much hope for Ferrari, if I'm perfectly honest, in either world title.
Yeah, it's just not looking that likely. And I think for Vettel, the reason he, in the second half of the season, did so well, I think it's because there wasn't the pressure of a world championship there. That's why he was better in the second half of the season than he was in 2018 or 2017. But yeah, hopefully Vettel can be a bit better than I'm thinking, but I don't see enough evidence, honestly, that he's going to be any better than he was in 2019. Hopefully he is, but I just don't, really see that. But again, hopefully they do, or Sebastian Vettel does, show us that he can get back towards his best in 2020. But let's now get on to Red Bull Racing. Red Bull Racing with Honda, in my opinion, are the dark horses for the 2020 World Championship, because if Red Bull and Honda at the start of the 2020 season can produce a car altogether that can be basically how it was towards the second half of the season compared to Mercedes and Ferrari, with driver Max Verstappen, who should maintain his great level next season, then I think Verstappen in that Red Bull can bring home a world championship. As I'll get onto later, I don't quite think it'll be as simple as that, but I think Max Verstappen definitely next season can win the world championship. Whether he will is a completely different discussion, but again, the start of next season is so crucial. It's so crucial for Red Bull because they've got to not start off amazingly, because if you notice with Red Bull, they never really start the season off well. They tend to start off okay, then they'll just improve as the season goes on. By the end of the season, Red Bull are very good compared to how they were at the start of the season. So I'm not expecting Red Bull to be amazing at the first few races, but they've got to be quite a bit closer in terms of lap time compared to, say, Mercedes, if Mercedes still have the best car, if they are going to have any hope with, Max Verstappen of winning the Drivers' World Championship and having a good Constructors' Championship position against a team like Ferrari as well. So the start of next season is crucial for Max Verstappen, as I just said a moment ago. As long as he maintains his level of performance, I think Max Verstappen can win the World Championship, but he does need help, does need a better car to start the season off with, and Honda to continue to improve on the power unit side. And I think we'll also need his teammate, Alex Albon, to kind of get in there as well and help him out in blocking other drivers, or not blocking other drivers, but, scoring more points than, say, Max's championship rivals. So Max definitely, as long as he does get that help, he should be right up there consistently next season. And for Alex Albon, I'm actually, as I'll get onto later, I think Albon will be a bit of a surprise in 2020. I think the Red Bull car next season will be definitely quite a bit better than it was in 2019. And I think Albon, once he's had a proper winter with the team, pre-season testing program, I think Albon next season is going to be one of the biggest surprises in 2020. I think Albon will definitely get a podium next season. And if the Red Bull car is good enough, he might be able to be maybe first or second in one or maybe two races. But he has to improve on what he was doing at the end of last season, because even though he was doing better than Gasly, his lap times and pace compared to Max Verstappen was still not quite good enough. He was still way too far off his teammates. So as long as he can close that gap and again gain some confidence over testing and in the first few races, I think Albon can definitely have a good season at Red Bull. And again, look out for him, because I think he will be quite a surprise, especially for the top runners in 2020. But Nib, for Red Bull, do you think if they can get it right at the start of next season, do you think they can be championship contenders with Max Verstappen?
Yeah, 100%. If Red Bull produced the car, and Honda produced a good enough engine, of course Verstappen can challenge for the world title. He's one of the best drivers on the grid. He's shown that for, three or so years now. He's been consistently at the top. One of the fastest drivers always at every weekend. And yeah, for sure, if Red Bull produce a good enough car, Verstappen can win. But as I've been saying over and over again, Red Bull start very, very slowly. They did always when they won the championship back at the start of the decade, except for 2011, where Vettel had won, 8 races out of 9 or whatever the hell it was, when he went on that ridiculous run. They'd always started slow at the start of the season. So I think that Red Bull can start a little bit stronger this season. Of course, they got a podium in Australia with Verstappen, but after that, it wasn't too much better. But yeah, I think that Red Bull, I think that they can challenge for the world title next year. I'm not quite sure if they would be able to win it, but I think that Verstappen for sure has a chance. And I think, let's face it, we all want to see Verstappen versus Hamilton every single race, and chucking a little bit of a Charles Leclerc in there, get that going as well. That would be absolutely mega. So yeah, I think that Red Bull can do decently well. Now, of course, talking about Alexander Albon, I think that he had a really good start to his Red Bull career. If I'm perfectly honest, of course, he should have had a podium in Brazil after the contact with Hamilton. That was sadly taken away from him. But yeah, I think you're right. I think we'll see Albon be on the podium quite a bit more next season. Who knows? Even pick up a race win. He really is a strong driver. I think he does do a little bit better in races, and if he can get a little bit closer to Verstappen, say qualifying, and we've seen him get a lot closer than I think most of us expected in qualifying on a couple occasions. I think that he really can have a good and strong 2020. So yeah, I absolutely agree with you that Alexander Albon is one of the dark packages. Dark horses, I should say. I don't know why I said dark packages for 2020.
That was a bit of a weird way of saying dark horse. But anyway, before we get to the midfield, I'll have a quick skim of the chat, see what you guys are saying. And then we'll move on to the midfield in just a moment. But I just want to say, guys, don't forget to subscribe for more content like this, as we do podcast episodes basically once a week. Next week, though, will be, because obviously Christmas is coming up very soon, next week's podcast will be the last one of 2019. So don't forget to come along to that and subscribe for more podcast episodes in 2020 as well. Bottom right of the screen, you can do it there. Or go to my homepage and do it there and hit the notifications bell and hit the like button as well. if you want to see this content continue and to show me that you do enjoy the content. Also, before I come to the chat, I just want to say a big thank you to everyone who enjoyed my Ferrari 2019 review that was split into 2 parts. One was 40 minutes, one was 37 minutes, I think. I just want to say thank you guys for, I guess, enjoying it as much as I did making the video. So yeah, thank you for enjoying it. And there are, as I'll get onto at the end of the stream, there are more, hopefully, long, detailed videos coming before the end of the year. So I'll get onto that later on. But let me now read out what you guys are having to say in the chat in terms of next season. So Sebastian says, I don't think Red Bull would produce a good enough car, as they never do. There's more chance of Ferrari having a better car at the start. I hope there is a title battle between Lewis, Max and Charles. I think that is the hope, that we get at most Lewis, Max and Charles Leclerc battling for the championship, because I think that would be epic. But as we've been saying, the start of next season is crucial to who is going to, really mount a title challenge. Because if you don't start the car off, or start the season off rather, with a car that is good enough for, say, the first 5-6 races, as we saw in 2019, you can end up being nearly 100 points off, and then your championship, challenge is basically over. So the start of next season is very crucial. But I think definitely Red Bull, I think they'll be better at the start of next season than they were last season in comparison pace-wise to Mercedes. I think last year, altogether, they were about 3/4 of a second slower than Mercedes in the first 8 or 9 races. So if they can close that to, say, at most 4 to 5 tenths of a second, then that'll put them a lot more in play for later on in the season as well. Right. Let's find some other ones here. Sebastian also says, Charles will dominate Vettel next season, in my opinion. A year more experience, and if he drives like he has in the last season, he should be fine. Yeah, I think Leclerc, I think the first 7-8 races, I think it'll be pretty equal. But then once we get to around Silverstone, Hungary time, I think Leclerc from then on will dominate Vettel, because I think Vettel, by then, any hope of competing for the World Championship will probably be over by that point. Arc 33, why aren't Ferrari changing their strategist if they're making a lot of mistakes? Because they're idiots, that's why. How they haven't got rid of an Arca Ueda is a mystery of life, honestly. How does that guy still have a job in that area? It's mind-bending stuff, it really is. But again, if you want to hear my thoughts on Ferrari, then and if you haven't seen the 2-part review of Ferrari season, it is in the description down below, where it says Ferrari in 2019 mission failed part 1 and part 2. The links are there in the description, so if you haven't seen them yet, then make sure to do so. Right, let's find some others here if I can. We'll read out some more comments from you guys for the next 5 minutes, and then I'll get on to the midfield. Shaq B, expectations, he says, for Max are too high. I don't think they are. I don't think they are. I think, again, as long as he gets the car that he had set at the end of last season, I think he can definitely compete for the championship. And I think if you look at Max in 2019, if he had a car the entire season that was not as good as Lewis Hamilton's car, but, within 0.3 of a second, I think Max definitely would have pushed Lewis Hamilton a lot harder in the championship than, obviously, Valtteri Bottas did. Right, let's find some others here. Who do you guys think the best driver is on the grid? From Jules Elbers. I think for you, Nib, isn't it, is Lewis Hamilton. I'm right.
What'd you say? Sorry?
Someone asked, who do you guys think is the best driver on the grid?
Oh, Hamilton. Yeah, no question.
I'd have to say still Lewis Hamilton. Yeah. If Verstappen keeps his performances up, though, he can definitely get in there. But yeah, Hamilton, I'd say still. Best driver on the grid? Right, let's find a couple more comments and then we'll get into McLaren and Renault. Nello, I think the Mercs will take that straight line speed advantage in 2020 and maintain their downforce. Rest of the field to play catch up. That's another thing we haven't quite talked about is the design concepts going into 2020. And also, there has been some news today to do with the tyres for next season. In next season's Formula 1 season, we will be using 2019 tyres. The tyres, of course, we saw during 2019 because teams simply are not happy and the drivers are not happy with the 2020 compounds. So the 2020 compounds will never see the light of day and we'll be using the same tyres next season, which should make it a bit more interesting when it comes to pit stops and tyre wear because, of course, the cars will be next season faster. So they'll be stressing the tyres even more than they were during 2019. And I think tyre wear, honestly, during last season was probably worse than it was in 2017 or 18. So I think we could see some more pit stops next season. Again, because of the faster cars, that will generate more stress in the tyres. Let me find one final one. And then we'll get on to the rest of the teams. Will F1 says, for me, Ferrari or Red Bull need to win one of the first 3 races next year. And if that doesn't happen, Mercedes will win the title again. Well, when it comes to the constructors, I agree. I think if Mercedes win the first 3 or 4 races, the constructors is done and probably the drivers will be as well. But it does also kind of depend on the manner of how Mercedes win the first 3 or 4 races if they do. If they win the races but are not that quick and say 3 of the 4 of them, wins at the start of the season are barely, victories over the opposition, then I don't think it's quite over. But if it's similar to last season where they just dominate the races, then yeah, it'll be over very quickly. But let's hope the Red Bull and Ferrari start the season strong. But now into the midfield, and first off, McLaren, great 2019 after what was a horrible 2018. 2 drivers, Carlos Sainz and Lando Norris, great season as well. But McLaren made gigantic steps forward from 2018, not only on the track pace-wise, but back in the factory and how the team is being restructured for the future as well. So McLaren are looking a lot better going into this season than I thought they would be about a year and a half ago. So great to see there. And given that McLaren have been working on their 2020 car, probably one of the earliest out of any other team, because according to McLaren, they've been working on their 2020 car since the French Grand Prix, basically, in terms of concentrating, most of, if not all of their efforts on the 2020 car. So that is quite an ominous thing in the midfield for McLaren going into next season. And I think McLaren, honestly, I think they'll just continue where they left off in 2019. I think they'll have the best car in the midfield. I think they will close the gap to the top runners, but it won't be a massive gap, that they're going to cut. I think they'll probably be a 10th or 2 closer, but again, it won't be anything massive to put themselves up there with Red Bull, Ferrari, Mercedes. But I think McLaren will have the best car next season. I think both drivers will do well. I think Carlos Sainz will be very strong again. I think Lando Norris will have a better season next season now that he has a year under his belt, and he should be probably stronger compared to Carlos Sainz next season as well. But yeah, McLaren, I think, will be absolutely fine. And I think going into 2021, as long as they, again, maintain what they were doing at the end of 2019, then they can start to shift some focus onto 2021, where, of course, new regulations, but also a new power unit supplier in Mercedes-Benz. So yeah, hopefully McLaren start the season off how they left it in 2019. Nib, for McLaren, I know you've been bigging them up in the last few months, rightfully so. Do you think they'll just have a very similar season next season compared to 2019?
Yeah, I think they'll have a very similar season results-wise, but I think in general they will be closer to the top 3 teams. They were already very, very good on the 2019 tyres. And, I think that they will just be even better now, considering that they are being kept for 2020. The fact that they didn't upgrade their car since the French Grand Prix, pretty much, they brought little bits and pieces, but there were no major upgrades since the French Grand Prix. And to remain that consistent and that dominant at the front of the midfield for the majority of the rest of the season was quite a remarkable thing by McLaren. So, yeah, I think that they will remain the fourth best team in on the grid. Carlos Sainz, I think he'll have another very, very strong season. He is a fantastic driver and really displayed that this year. I think that Lando Norris, if he can stay out of trouble a little bit more on lap one, of course, he didn't. The majority of the time, it was through no fault of his own. He just got caught up in other people's instances. So I think if Lando can just have a little bit better luck, I think that he will score more points, not finish as lower down, say in the drivers championship. But yeah, I think that with a full season under their belt, now with this new structure at McLaren, James Key, Andreas Seidel, that they will have a very, very strong 2020 season, and I really do expect them to be another step closer and to be a step ahead of the midfield. If I'm perfectly honest, maybe not a whole step, but maybe a quarter step. Because they'll be in Formula 1.25, and the rest of the midfield will be Formula 1.5, and then obviously Mercedes, Red Bull, and Ferrari, if they want to sort out their tyres and not be a second off, they can be in Formula 1 as well.
Yeah, absolutely. With McLaren, yeah, I think it will just be a similar season, hopefully, to what it was in 2019. But pace-wise, I think if McLaren can be, say, at most a second off the front-running pace, and when I mean front-running, I mean, the fastest team at any given weekend, then that will put them in a very comfortable position for the season to finish again P4 in the Constructors, but also be kind of, in there and ready and waiting in case something goes off ahead of them in certain races, so they can maybe get a podium finish next season. I think McLaren can get a podium finish next season, but again, they've got to be close enough to be able to capitalize, and hopefully they are. But let's now get on to a team, Renault, who really do have a critical season ahead in 2020, because if they do not get this right in 2020, then I don't really see a great future for Renault in Formula 1 past 2021. I know they are restructuring their team for 2021, and they're trying their best to, get personnel in the right areas, good personnel in the right areas to make 2021 and beyond something a lot better than it has been in the last year or two. But, again, with how 2019 was, it isn't looking great for Renault. It really isn't, because I don't think Renault are as committed to Formula 1 as they were, again, a year or two ago. And I think their drivers, definitely Daniel Ricciardo, who is one of them, of course, for 2020, if 2020 does not go to plan, again, then I think Daniel Ricciardo will be looking to leave that team, and they'll lose a star driver, which is something they do need if they're going to have a good period after 2021. But Renault, now that they've got rid of technical director Nick Chester, and I don't know who they're putting in place, so I can't quite remember what the situation is there, but for next season, undoubtedly, they've got to produce a car that can fight with McLaren on a consistent basis, not at certain races when things don't go horribly wrong for them. Renault have got to, if they can, really fight hard for fourth in the Constructors. I'm not saying they have to finish fourth in the Constructors, but they've got to be a lot closer to McLaren than they were at the end of 2019. At the end of 2019, they were, 50 odd? Were they 50? Maybe 50 odd points behind McLaren in the Constructors. And they cannot be that far off if they're going to have a season that they can consider good. And again, critical season for Renault, and I hope they get it right. I know I've criticised them a lot, and I will be criticising them again during this month once I get into them for 2019, but they've got to get next year right, and I really hope they do, because I want to see another team up there in Formula 1 able to get podiums and maybe even a race victory, not just 3 teams in the sport. But Nib, For Renault and for your driver, Daniel Ricciardo, it's kind of a do-or-die season, isn't it?
Yes, certainly. I was going to say pretty much everything you just said about Daniel Ricciardo, so thanks for that. But um, yeah, I'm not too sure how Renault will do next season. If I'm perfectly honest, I think, as I pretty much just said, I don't think that they'll be close to McLaren. If I'm perfectly honest, they had a good kind of straight line that just wasn't really good enough in the high speed corners. Actually, they're actually pretty good in some of the lower speed corners. If you look at the data throughout most of the season, but in the high speed corners, they were just not good enough. On the tires, they struggled to keep the tires in a good window. Of course, keeping the 2019 tires for 2020 could help. I tongue twisted myself for really no reason just then. So yeah, I think the Renault could be a little bit stronger, but I honestly don't think so. I've been so let down by Renault this season. Of course, my favorite driver, Daniel Ricciardo, races for them, and yeah, I think you're absolutely right. If they don't have a good enough season, I see him leaving the team. If I'm perfectly honest, to go to either Mercedes or Ferrari if there is a seat that becomes available. So, yeah, they really need a good season if they want to keep Daniel Ricciardo, because of course his contract does run out at the end of this season, like many other drivers on the grid, in fact. And we didn't speak about Esteban Ocon. I'm really happy that Esteban Ocon's back on the grid. He certainly didn't deserve to lose his seat at the end of the 2018 season, so it's really good to see him back on the grid. And I think that it might take him a little bit to get into the swing of things, but I think by the end of it, he'll have what will be a pretty good 2020 season. I don't think that he'll beat Ricciardo, that's for sure, but I think he can be there or thereabouts. I think that he probably be in a similar position to what Nico Hülkenberg was throughout the season with Ricciardo. If not just a little bit further off. So, yeah, it'll be interesting to see how Esteban Ocon does against Daniel Ricciardo, who we all know who is a really high caliber and even top class driver.
Absolutely, and it is good to see Esteban back in Formula One. As you say, definitely good enough to be on the grid. But I think at the start of next season, he is in for quite a shock. Not that he won't be good enough or anything, but I think the competition in the midfield is even stronger than what it was when he left the midfield, when he, of course, left a seat at the end of 2018. So I think he will be in for quite a shock again at the start of next season, and I think he will start the season off quite slow, and then I think around Silverstone, Hungary time, he'll pick it up and probably end the season off quite well and be definitely competitive with Daniel Ricciardo, but I think he might have a tough time at the start of the season to adjust to how, again, competitive the midfield is, and it will be again next season. But now, let's get into the next team, which is Toro Rosso, who of course finished in 6th in the Constructors' Championship, but they are no longer Toro Rosso for next season. It is either Tauri or Tori. I'm going to call them Tauri because, of course, they're Italian, and I think that just sounds better. Sounds a bit more Italian.
And you don't want to say Tori.
No, I don't want to say that at all. So AlphaTauri, we're going to call the ex-Toro Rosso team from now on. It's going to definitely take some adjusting with the name, and I can guarantee me and Nib in the next year or so will call them Toro Rosso about 10 million times, but we will try to remember what their real name is during the course of 2020. I'm sure for 2021 and beyond we'll get used to it, just like we have with Racing Point. But honestly, I think for next season, I know this season they were very quick and they were very strong, especially in the races, but I think this is going to be the midfield team that honestly drops off, because if you look at 2019, of course, it was a new set of regulations, and Toro Rosso, of course, got them right. So going into next season, I just don't think the other midfield teams that finish below them, I don't think they'll get it as wrong as they did in certain areas next season, such as Racing Point, who of course suffered a lack of development. I think that'll improve. Haas, I don't think will be as bad next season as they were this season. And I think Alfa Romeo, with their, second year of the same lineup, I think they'll improve on what they did in 2019. So for this team, I think they'll be definitely in there in certain races. They'll score some points, but if you compare it to 2019, I don't think this team will do as well. Simply because the other midfield teams below them, I just don't see how they will possibly do even worse than what they did last season. Not saying Racing Point were awful or anything, but Racing Point's season could have been a lot better if they actually could develop the car for basically the whole of the summer. And Alpha and Haas, I think, will get it a lot more right next season than they did in 2019. So yeah, they'll be in there at certain races, but I expect this team to really fall off into 2020 and fall down the constructors to where they normally finish in instead of 6th place, which is quite high for this team. But Nib, for AlphaTauri, where do you think, or how do you think they're going to do in 2020? Do you think they're going to drop off, or do you think they'll just maintain position?
I think that they'll fall down the constructors a little bit. I think it's going to be very hard for them to get 2 podiums again, next season. But at the same time, I don't think that they'll drop off, from their usual position in the midfield. I think they'll stay about the same. But just due to the fact that they're not going to get, I don't think that they're going to get 2 podiums. Who knows? They could get 3. There could be even more madness of some races. So, you can never rule out what will happen in Formula One. That's for sure. But I really think that the AlphaTauri will stay about the same, if I'm perfectly honest.
As well, we haven't mentioned the drivers. Was it Gasly and Kvyat?
Oh, yeah, of course.
For the drivers, I'll quickly just mention them. So Gasly hopefully maintains his form at the end of the season, end of 2019 season, does not drop off again. And for Daniel Kvyat, kind of a big year for him because I don't think he'll be at this team in 2021. I just don't see him at this team past 2020. I think he'll probably move on to maybe Haas or someone like that in 2021. So it's a big year for him, a big year for Gasly, because these 2 drivers, if they're never going to drive for Red Bull again, they've got to, in 2020, really prove why they should be on the grid at another team that, of course, is not in the Red Bull driver program. Do you think also big year for Gasly and Kvyat?
Yeah, I agree. I wouldn't, if these 2 really don't perform throughout the season, I could see AlphaTauri doing what they did with Jamie Alguersuari and Sebastian Buemi back in the day. Just cut them at the end of the season when they were actually driving pretty good, even to a point, Jean-Eric Vergne. So yeah, let's see what happens on that front. I think that Gasly will have a very strong season, if I'm perfectly honest. Well, compared to what the car is able to produce, he was very strong ever since he went into that seat. Had some great performances, of course, finished on the podium in Brazil. But yeah, I don't think that Kvyat will be as good, if I'm perfectly honest, next season. He had a very strong start to the season and then sort of fallen off towards the end. And, I don't see Kvyat ever being put back in the Red Bull. I think that, if I'm perfectly honest, I just think that Kvyat was really put in that team because he's a reliable driver, who's a quick driver, who can score points, not because he's going to get into the Red Bull team. So as soon as Red Bull have a driver that they are willing to put in that car, that they think could make the Red Bull driver, could make the actual Red Bull team, then they will put that driver in. That's just the ruthlessness that Red Bull will show when it comes to Danny Kvyat and that seat in that team. So yeah, I think that will certainly be an interesting development throughout 2020 and possibly even through 2021.
Yep, absolutely. Before we go on to the rest of the teams, I just want to quickly thank Nello Angelo for a donation of £2. Thank you very much for that. And if anyone else wants to donate, then go ahead and do so. But it's up to you if you want to do so. But now we'll get into the next team, which is Racing Point, a team that could have had a lot better of a 2019 again if they had a better development program than what they had. And I think if they start the season off next season, how they ended this season, I think Racing Point will be absolutely fine. They'll be a lot closer during the season to teams like McLaren and Renault like they were during the middle of the season in 2019. Don't think they'll be finishing top 5 in the Constructors, but I think Racing Point will be consistently in there more so than they were during 2019. 2019, when they had the developments on their car post Hockenheim, most of the time they were pretty good, but there were certain races where they just, for some reason, fell off and weren't really quick. For example, Brazil. I have no idea why they were so slow in Brazil, to be honest. But yeah, I think Racing Point next season, they'll be better. They are definitely a dark horse to surprise people in the midfield because, of course, this team in 2016 and 17 finished P4 on the Constructors with little resources and money compared to other teams in that midfield, such as Renault and McLaren. So watch out for Racing Point. As long as they can keep up the development during the season and keep up with certain teams like Renault or Alfa Romeo, then I think Racing Point will do fine. I think the 2 drivers will do fine. Sergio Perez, I think, will be good next season and will do fine. And for Lance Stroll, I think he will improve on 2019. I hope desperately he improves on qualifying. I don't think we'll see massive improvement from Stroll, but we'll see improvement for sure from Lance. But for Racing Point, I think if there's going to be a surprise in the midfield, it's going to be from this team because of the, I think, potential they have once they have a consistent season of development during the season. Nib, for Racing Point, do you agree? Do you think they are the dark horse to really surprise people in the midfield?
Yeah, I think that Racing Point really had an underwhelming season, if I'm perfectly honest, and I really like that photo that you've got on screen now. I wonder why. So yeah, I think that they will have a better season than what they had in 2019. You know, they didn't have their full car at the start of the season, so you know they were bound to have a pretty poor start. And let's face it, after Baku, up until they brought their upgrades at starting in Hockenheim and Hungary and Spa, they were shambolic. If I'm perfectly honest, and I do think that they'll have a stronger season. I think that they'll probably finish higher up in the standings next year. That's for sure. Perez will of course have a stronger season, but a really important season for Lance Stroll and his development as a driver. Of course, we talked about in depth last week that if he is able to improve his qualifying performances, he will be a very, very solid and capable midfield driver. And if he can do that, I think that Racing Point could say even challenge Renault. If I'm perfectly honest, so it'll be really interesting to see how Racing Point do. I think that they will have a much better season. Certainly at the start, because if you look, most of their points come from, certainly a whole chunk of their points came from when Stroll got that podium in Hockenheim, of course, and then of course some from very strong individual performances by Perez. And if they have 2 drivers who is capable of scoring points more consistently, with of course Stroll scoring some more points, I think that they certainly can be up towards the top of the midfield.
Yeah, hopefully Stroll does improve, and I think Stroll is the key for Racing Point in 2020, because if he does improve and Perez stays the same as he was in 2019, then I think, definitely improvement will come. And I have to say again with Perez, I think if the car is better next season, more consistently over the season, I think Perez will go down as one of the best, or not best, but one of the better midfield performers, because I thought in 2019 actually he did very well and was one of the best midfield drivers, but because the car wasn't quite there, he didn't quite get the credit he deserved. But anyway, let's now get into Alfa Romeo, and then we'll get into Haas in a moment, the 2 Ferrari customer teams. Alfa Romeo, I think next season will get it more so right than they did this season, because in 2019 there were points in the season where they were right up there with McLaren and Renault as having one of the best cars in the midfield. And there were certain races that, with Kimi Räikkönen, they were able to battle Carlos Sainz and Lando Norris and Hülkenberg and Ricciardo and be right in the points. But then at certain points of the season, Spain, Monaco, end of the season as well, except for Brazil, they just dropped off and really didn't show any pace compared to, say, the latter part of the summer where they were very quick, or the start of the season. So really, 2020, now that they've got the same driver lineup for the second season, it's about getting the consistency, going a bit more. Because if they were consistently good last season, I think Alpha would have beat Renault in the Constructors. But because they lacked the consistency, and because they lacked the, just the brains, to pull off the results they needed to get, that's why they didn't get it. And I think Alpha next season will get it more so right. Kimi Räikkönen will maintain his level, and Antonio Giovinazzi, as long as he maintains how good he was in the final 8-9 races of 2019 for 2020 most of the time, then I think the drivers will do better than they did in 2019. And the car, now that they'll kind of know that their design concept for 2019 didn't really work out, they'll be able then in 2020 to have a better season. And I hope they do, because Alpha, they have a lot of potential as a team, but last season they didn't quite show a lot of it, and I hope they do next season. And for Haas F1, there's no way Haas F1 can have a season that was as bad as 2019, where they were only good at about 2 races. They've got to have a better season in 2020, because if they don't, then going into 2021 and the new era of Formula 1, I'm not too sure about Haas as a Formula 1 team, because after 2018, where they made massive progress, top 5 of the Constructors, pace-wise, they really should have finished P4 in the Constructors in 2018. They were looking great in Formula 1, but after the embarrassment that was 2019 with, rich energy and the drivers not quite being, as great as they should be, considering their talent levels, and the car being horrific to drive as well, 2020, kind of similar to Renault, is a very important season for Haas F1, and I don't think they will be as bad as they were in 2019 in 2020. There will definitely be improvement of points and pace. I don't know if the position will be that much different to how they were in 2019 in the Constructors, but they've got to be better, and surely they will be better next season. Nib, for Alpha and Haas, the 2 Ferrari customer teams, surely they're going to improve on 2019, because again, 2019 could have been a lot more for both teams.
I mean, yeah, I think that Alfa Romeo were really, really good in the first half of the season. We talked about that last week, but just in the second half of the season, they didn't really bring upgrades. They didn't perform, and I think that they sort of made that same mistake that Ferrari did in going down that sort of low drag profile of car. So I think if they can do something about that next year, get some more downforce on the car, then that they can improve and have a better season. And I expect them to be around about where Racing Point are, if I'm perfectly honest, for Alfa Romeo. Giovinazzi, super important season for Antonio Giovinazzi. He really needs to step it up if he wants to stay in that Alfa Romeo seat, because there are a lot of young Ferrari drivers in that academy that are coming through. Robert Schwartzman, Marcus Armstrong, Mick Schumacher, of course. So it's going to be really that seat really is going to be up for grabs if Giovinazzi doesn't perform. And then, of course, Kimi Räikkönen. Well, it's Kimi Räikkönen. He'll have another good season. Of course, it might be his last year in the sport, which is really sad to think of. As we come to speak of it, I love Kimi. Who doesn't love Kimi? And I think we all want Kimi to stay in the sport, because, well, he proved it this year that he can still drive at an incredibly high level. So yeah, I think that Alfa Romeo will have a fairly strong season. Haas, Magnussen will be fantastic. Grosjean will be, I was going to swear, absolutely horrid. And there won't be too much improvement, if I'm perfectly honest. Even though that they're going to keep the same tyres, I think they still won't understand the tyres because they're Haas. They'll, in Spa, still be using the Australia spec car because that's the fastest type of car that they have. So yeah, that's going to be Haas's season, and I think that they'll be they'll have another really poor season. I think that Magnussen will score points. Score points every now and then, not as consistently as say as he did this season, especially early on in the season. But yeah, I don't think that 2020 is looking very good for Haas.
Yeah, I see your point with Haas. They look as though they could be that team that just again has another awful season as well with the whole tyre situation. Not just down to 2019, this whole tyre situation, because also in 2018 they were having troubles with the tyres, the soft disc compounds, and just wearing them out too much. So it's not like this has only been a 2019 issue. So I understand why you say that, but let's now get to the final team, which is Williams, and well, we'll keep it quick. Williams are still going to be at the back. They won't be as bad at the start of 2020, I hope, as they were in 2019, where it looked like on qualifying they were carrying a race fuel load. That's how bad the car was. They won't start the season off as bad, and as long as they turn up to testing for all of the days, and now there's less days of testing, so they don't have as much pressure this time. As long as they turn up to all the days of testing, get done what they want, then they should start the season off better than they did in 2019, but that's not really saying much. And yeah, I think Williams will still be at the very back. But let me quickly, before we get into finally, at the end of this stream, our top 10 constructors and driver championships positions that we're predicting early on. Let me quickly read the chat and see what you guys have to say about the midfield, and also read out a super chat from Count Blah for $5. He says, thanks for the year of content once again. Thank you very much for that, mate. And he says, and the gift that keeps on giving, Ferrari. Right, let's find some final midfield comments. And then, yeah, we'll get on to our top 10 predictions that I think, honestly, last year, my early predictions for the season compared to my predictions after testing were actually closer to what happened. So you never know. We could be getting it exactly right now, and then be getting it a lot more wrong after testing. But right, let's find some here. JB says, I don't think Perez got enough of a shout as he should have. He scored every race after the summer break apart from Singapore where he didn't finish. And he was looking like he was going to be in the top 10. Well, Perez did finish P10 in the Drivers' Championship. So, yeah, Perez had a very good season. Very good season. Very good performances. He had Baku. He was great. Finished at the front of the midfield. China, he was great, where he made that fantastic start. Abu Dhabi, that final lap overtake was amazing. But yeah, Perez, good season. But if he has more of a car there to work with, then it could be, a very, very strong season for him. Right, let's find some others here if I can. Will Renault continue after 2020? Yeah, they definitely will, because they're already securing certain people for the post-2021 era. Try and make it a bit better than what it is currently, but once Formula One starts, going to new powertrains around 2025, 2026, I think Renault might pull out around then, because I just don't see Renault ever being world championship material with this team they've got. I just don't see it. Maybe they can win a race, a couple races here and there, but I just don't ever see them getting to that level where they can be like they were around 2005, 2006 with Fernando Alonso, of course. Will F1, if McLaren improve as much as they did for 2020 as they did for this season, they could be challenging for wins next season. They won't be doing that. And maybe the championship, but that's not realistic. Yeah, it definitely is not realistic. But I see what your point is. if they keep improving as much as they did from 2018 to 2019, then yeah, I see your point. But you got to realize in 2018 they were very, very poor. They were, at the end of 2018, they were probably slower in the races than Williams were. That's how bad they were in 2018. So they couldn't do any worse than what they were doing. So they had to improve. There was always going to be somewhat improvement for 2019. And I think this time last year when doing our early 2019 predictions, I think I said that McLaren will be better in 2019, but I don't think they'll be, anything special. And of course they were something special, getting a podium and having a great season, but they couldn't do any worse than what they did in 2018. That was an awful season for McLaren. Right, let's find, I think, one final comment and then we'll get on to our predictions. And guys, also make sure to put in your early 2020 predictions for the top 10 of the Drivers' and Constructors' Championships. And then before I go, I'll read some out. And also, if you're watching this after, comment them down below and I'll respond to some of them and what I think of them. But get one final comment. Mostly an F1 fan. Haas will still be using the 2019 Melbourne spec next year. And Hank M says if Haas won't perform, then Gene Haas could lose interest. Could happen. And I think he did an interview a couple months ago saying that, if Haas are not quite doing it in Formula 1, then he may just, pull the team out of Formula 1. So could easily happen. But now let's get into my and Nib's predictions, our early predictions for 2020, our top 10 for the Drivers' Championship, and our top 10, of course, for the Constructors. So I have gone for quite a surprise for the Drivers' Championship. It's not massively surprising, but there is one person that is in quite a surprising position. So here is my World Drivers' Championship prediction for 2020. Lewis Hamilton, I think, will win the World Championship. I think he'll be closer.
Oh, I wonder who's second.
Lewis Hamilton, I think, will win the World Championship because he's still, again, best driver, best team on the grid, and I think he'll have just enough to pull out ahead of Max Verstappen and Leclerc at the end of the season to win the World Championship. Max Verstappen, I think, will finish in second. I think Max will, I think he'll do well in the championship for the first 3 quarters of the season, but then once we get to the end of the season, I think you'll see Hamilton produce probably his best form, and then he'll just about, in one of the final 2 races, get his 7th world title. Charles Leclerc will be 3rd because I think Leclerc will do very well, and Ferrari, they're not going to be really slow, but they'll be quick enough at certain races for Leclerc to be up there. And Leclerc will get probably a couple race wins, but I don't think Leclerc, by the second half of the season, will really be in the championship reckoning. And then my big surprise is Alexander Albon in 4th place. There's a couple reasons for this. One, because I think the Red Bull car will be next season quite a bit better than it was in 2019. I think Albon, I like Albon. He does, he's very good. I've noticed this. He's very good at adapting to the situations that he's in. If you look at the last year or so, it's been mental for Albon. You didn't think he'd be in a Toro Rosso for 2019. He was, and in the first half of the season did pretty well. Then adapted well to the Red Bull car. Yeah, he did fall off a bit towards the end of the season, but I thought he adapted well. And as Nib was saying earlier, Albon is a good race driver. So if the Red Bull can be a bit better at the start of next season, and Albon does improve, which I think he will, he won't be, racing Verstappen hard in 2020, but I think Albon will be much improved, and he will finish P4 in the Drivers' Championship. Valtteri Bottas will finish in 5th. This is not me thinking Bottas will be poor, but I just don't think, one, the Mercedes car will be as dominant next season. It probably still will be the best car, but it won't be as dominant. And Valtteri, I just don't think is as good as Verstappen and Leclerc. And I think Albon, again, will surprise people next season. And then 6th, Sebastian Vettel. Again, I think he'll regress as a driver, but also the team will not be any better, really, next season than they were during 2019. And then at the front of the midfield, basically, Carlos Sainz have gone for P7. I think he'll maintain his great level from 2019. Daniel Ricciardo, 8th. I think the Renault car will be better next season and be a bit more consistent for Ricciardo to be in that position. Norris, I'll go P9. I think Norris, again, he'll be a bit more in there with Sainz, but he won't be beating Sainz in my opinion. And then Kimi Raikkonen, I think, will be in P10 in the Drivers' Championship. And then for the Constructors, I am going for Mercedes to win the Constructors again. Red Bull will finish in 2nd because I think they'll have a better car. And I just think as a driver lineup, they work well, Verstappen and Albon. And I think Ferrari will have yet another dramatically bad season for them. McLaren will be P4, comfortably ahead of Renault P5. Alfa Romeo 6th and Racing Point 7th. As Nib was saying a moment ago, Alfa and Racing Point are going to be very close in 2020. They are very similar teams and they have, I think, similar budgets as well. Haas, I think, will be 8th. And then AlphaTauri, I'm going for 9th. Again, I do think they'll drop off. They won't be horrible next season, but they won't be anywhere near as good as they were in 2019. And then, of course, Williams are 10th. But now we'll get into Nibs. World Drivers' Championship prediction, and I'll read it out. So, in the top 10, you've gone Lewis Hamilton to win the championship, Leclerc 2nd, Verstappen 3rd. Do you want to explain your top 3 first?
Yeah, Hamilton and Mercedes are unbeatable. Let's just get them up in the DMs because it hasn't loaded up on the screen just as well as speaking just then. So yeah, Hamilton first, unbeatable in the Mercedes, gonna win his 7th world title in my opinion. You just can't bet against Lewis Hamilton. I don't think you can at this point. Charles Leclerc 2nd. Even I think the Ferrari will be a better car in the corners, and Leclerc with more experience in the sport, making less and less mistakes. I think that he will have a very good 2020 season, and I think that he will finish 2nd in the championship. And of course, in a car that wasn't that great, he did have the most pole positions. And if the car is a little bit better, who knows? I think the Charles can step up to 2nd place in the championship. In 3rd place, I'm going to go Verstappen. I think it will be very close between Leclerc and Verstappen all season long. I think we'll see lots of battling between Hamilton, Leclerc, and Verstappen, if I'm perfectly honest. I think I'm also hoping that that is going to be the case because, let's face it, who doesn't want to see that? Then I got Bottas in 4th, Vettel in 5th, Albon in 6th. I think that there won't be any porridge Bottas version 3.0, whatever you want to call it. Again, Bottas will win his Grand Prix. He always performs well in Austria, Russia, and a couple of other tracks. So I think we'll see Bottas on pole and getting some race wins throughout the year. Much like Vettel, I think that Leclerc will comfortably beat him in 2020, if I'm perfectly honest. I think that Vettel will probably also pick up a couple of race wins every, occasionally. I don't know where, but I think that Vettel will win at some stage throughout 2020. I think that we'll certainly see Albon be on the podium for at least a couple of times. It'll be great to see him get his first podium in the sport. And I'm sure that will be a great day for him. And then, of course, we've got Lando Norris in 7th, Sainz in 8th, Ricciardo in 9th, and Perez in 10th. I think the Norris and Sainz will be so close all season long. I think that Sainz had an edge on Norris at a couple of tracks just because Norris, of course, hasn't been in the sport for 5 years now like Sainz has. I think that Norris, with more experience, will start to close that gap to Sainz, especially in the races. And yeah, I think that Norris will just about beat Carlos Sainz next season. Then, of course, how can I not put Daniel Ricciardo in the top 10? One of the best drivers on the grid, let alone in the midfield. And I think that even if Renault do have a poor car, that Ricciardo will grind out results. We've seen him grind out some results in the second half of the season when that Renault wasn't exactly fantastic. So, yeah, I think that we'll see Ricciardo finish 9th. And then in 10th, Sergio Perez, of course, one of the best midfield drivers on the grid, and I think that he'll constantly pick up points in the midfield and that he will finish in P10. But now we'll move on to my constructors predictions, early constructors predictions for 2020.
And yep, here we
got that
go.
graphic up now? Yep.
So it is. So do you want to explain it then from 1st to 10th?
Yeah, sure. Merc, they're the best team in the grid. Ferrari, I think they'll just about beat Red Bull, if I'm perfectly honest. But I could really see that going either way between Red Bull and Ferrari. I think it depends a lot on how Albon performs. I think that Albon will do better, but I think it will be very close between Ferrari and Red Bull. So I think you could really interchange any of them. McLaren fourth, I think everyone will probably have them in fourth. Renault and Racing Point, I think it's going to be pretty close, but I still think I favour Renault purely because they have Daniel Ricciardo in the team, and if Stroll doesn't perform at a level that we hope he does in 2020, I think that Renault just about have the stronger driver pairing for that one. Then Alfa Romeo in 7th. I just think that I don't think that they'll do anything special next season, Alfa Romeo. Unless Giovinazzi, absolutely shocks us and Kimi, has some special vodka and finds about half a second, then I don't see Alfa Romeo finishing really any higher than 7th. Then we've got AlphaTauri in 8th. I just think that they'll have a pretty similar season to last year, just without those podiums. So I think that they'll finish in 8th. Of course, then Haas and Williams in 9th and 10th. Both of them, not able to bring upgrades, struggling with money. Sadly, it's sad that teams still do struggle with money in the sport. Haas, obviously, they've got a very good driver in Kevin Magnussen, it must be said, and so do Williams with George Russell. And who knows? Williams might shock us, and we could see a battle for 9th in the championship between Haas and Williams. And I guarantee you, it will be the French Grand Prix. There's absolutely nothing going on. These two teams will be having a ding-dong battle, and it won't be shown because that is about how FOM, and I think that is going to be the most reliable prediction of 2020, FOM's coverage of the races will still be absolutely horrific.
Yeah.
So there are my 2020, early 2020 predictions. What are we? In December, the season doesn't start till March, and of course, after pre-season testing, we would have all changed this. Ferrari are going to win the championship after Mexico. Leclerc is going to win 22 races. Verstappen and McLaren are going to be last. We'll have some rubbish predictions after pre-season testing. That's just the way it goes. So let's see how it all plays out once we get to pre-season testing.
By the way, I just want to say thank you very much for adding that new Nightbot command as well in the chat.
The Verstappen one.
Yeah. Thank you very much for doing that. Right, so that is our predictions then, mine and Nibs, and we'll probably be. I reckon we'll be a lot closer to what actually happens right now than we will after testing, as you say. Because Ferrari will probably be about 1 million seconds clear of everyone after testing, apparently. Right, mostly an F1 fan. His top 10 for the drivers, I think it is. Hamilton, Verstappen, Leclerc, Vettel, Bottas, Albon, Sainz, Norris, Ocon. Perez. Who else have we got here? Page ad Mercedes, McLaren, Red Bull, Ferrari. That's a bit ambitious, but you never know. Hank M, Red Bull, Honda will dominate with Verstappen in 2020. I don't think anyone's going to be dominating in 2020, pace-wise at least. Sebastian says for his drivers in the top 10, Hamilton, Leclerc, Max, Bottas, Vettel, Albon, Sainz, Norris, Ricciardo, Perez, nearly exactly the same as Nib. Burnout 154, Verstappen for world champion in 2029, probably the case. Find some others here if we can. Other predictions. A couple of people talking about the whole AlphaTauri Toro Rosso thing. What AlphaTauri is, I think it's a Red Bull clothing brand, an Italian Red Bull clothing brand. I think it is. I'm not quite sure, but it is similar to Benetton, because obviously Benetton were a fashion brand, and then they bought a Formula One team, and that's how they got into Formula One. So it's kind of similar to Benetton, but it's not, you know, this team isn't going to win a world championship in 10 years' time. You can guarantee that. Will F1, Verstappen, Hamilton, Vettel, Leclerc, Albon, Bottas, Sainz, Norris, Ricciardo, Raikkonen. JB, Chaz, fantasizing about Verstappen being world champion. Shock. Well, talking of Verstappen, I've got a video coming on him on Friday, comparing him to that's another driver, which I'll get onto in a moment. Right, let's find one final one if I can. And you know what? I'll end off with JB's comment. French Grand Prix 2019, battle between Norris, Ricciardo, Raikkonen, and Hülkenberg. Oh, let's watch Leclerc 5 seconds behind Bottas. Absolutely bang on the money. Anyway, that, guys, is the end of the podcast today. Thank you very much for coming along. By the way, nice to see quite a lot of you here for the podcast compared to last week. And hopefully our predictions for 2020 are somewhat, you know, like what actually happens in the season next season. Again, we will adjust them to what happens in testing, because of course there will be some surprises. Some teams who we think will be quick probably won't be that quick, and then maybe there'll be a surprise or two testing as well. So we will adjust them, but I think, yeah, they're looking pretty good, I'd say, for 2020. Niv, thanks for coming on, mate, and thanks for giving your predictions. Hopefully this time you're correct for 2020, but yeah, thanks for coming on, mate.
Of course, mate. It's been a good podcast. It's been a good laugh once again. Of course, we've got a brilliant new Nightbot. I love me being Nightbot. It's all I do basically now. With my life.
Oh my.
But yeah, yeah, no, it was a good podcast. I think they'll certainly be a lot closer with my predictions than this time last year when I made them, because you know, I said that Vettel would win the championship, and that was a bit silly of me, wasn't it? So yeah, let's see how if we stick with these predictions after testing, or if we change them, because I think that I'm going to tend to try and stick to these predictions, if I'm perfectly honest. But you know, been a good podcast. Now, thanks for having me on as usual, mate.
No problem. And well, knowing your luck, Sebastian Vettel will win his 5th world championship next season. Won't he?
You're not wrong.
So we'll see what happens. But yeah, that's coming on, mate. But before I end, just want to let you guys know what the content schedule is between now and next Tuesday, where we're going to do our final podcast of 2019. So on Friday, I will be uploading a video comparing Max Verstappen and Lewis Hamilton against one another in 2019, and looking at who has been the best driver, in my opinion, in 2019. So make sure to come along to that on Friday at 12 p.m. UK time. Then on Monday at 12 p.m. UK time, I will be finally doing a video on Carlos Sainz and giving him the credit for 2019 that he thoroughly does deserve. And then next Tuesday, what we're going to do for our final podcast of the year, because of course next year is a new decade, what we're going to do is review the decade of Formula One, look at the best drivers, best moments, best races, all that stuff. So if you want to review the decade, the 2010s decade of Formula One with us next week, then make sure to come along to the podcast next week for that. And don't forget to subscribe for that as well. Bottom right of the screen, you can do it right there. Or go to my homepage and do it there, and hit the notifications bell, and as well hit the like button for more content like this. Comment down below what you thought of this video, and comment down below for the drivers top 10, the constructors top 10. What are your predictions, your early predictions for 2020? Again, you don't have to stick to them, but again, based off what you think will happen next season and kind of what happened at the end of this season, what do you think will happen in 2020? Let me know in the comment section down below. As well, don't forget to join my Discord server, link below in the description. That's the best place it is for notifications, my videos and streams. And we have over 400 people in the server now, so don't forget to join that. And as well, don't forget to check out my review of Ferrari's 2019 season. Mission Failed, it's called. It's the 2-part series. And both videos, the link to both videos are in the description down below. So if you haven't seen it yet, it is quite long, but it is quite enjoyable, according to what you guys have said. If you haven't seen it yet and you want to, I guess, lay to rest Ferrari's 2019 and have a laugh, then make sure to go and watch those videos right now. And as well, don't forget to follow me on Twitter at Chaz6110. Check out my website, ChazzaHDF1 for more content like this. And also hit the Facebook page of ChazzaHDF1 with a like as well. But until next week's podcast and my next video on Friday, guys, it has been me, ChazzaHD. Goodbye.